Hall of Fame Letter Carriers, the history of NALC Branch 238. Situated in northeast Ohio, Canton is the 8th most populous city in Ohio. Founded in 1805 along the Nimishillen Creek, Canton is known as the home of the Professional Football Hall of Fame and the home of the 25th President of the United States, William McKinley. Canton is also home to NALC Branch 238, representing approximately 500 active and retired letter carriers in Canton, Massillon, Navarre, Strasburg, Louisville, and East Sparta. The history of Branch 238 is long and dynamic, reflective of the ups and downs of the NALC as a whole, as well as of Northeast Ohio. After multiple attempts to organize, the NALC on the national level was finally successful on August 29, 1889 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Almost 2 years after the NALC was successful in organizing, the 15 letter carriers in Canton, Ohio were successful in organizing Branch 238 on August 15, 1891. Of the 15 letter carriers in Canton, 8 of them elected to join the new upstart National Association of Letter Carriers. Less than 2 years later, and 12 miles away, Massillon letter carriers organized Branch 435 on June 21, 1893. When the Canton letter carriers organized in 1891, they faced very different working conditions and social pressures than letter carriers do today. In the late 1800s, postal jobs were extremely political, with postmaster and carriers being appointed as part of the spoils system. This meant that every time there was a new president, there would be turnover in the letter carrier craft. This ended with the assassination of President James Garfield by a disgruntled supporter who did not receive a government appointment. After this, letter carrier jobs were no longer filled by the spoils system, and instead required a civil service test. In the late 1880s, shortly after his election, President Grover Cleveland appointed attorney A.D. Braden as the postmaster of Canton. At this time, the Canton Post Office had a total of 23 employees, 15 of which were letter carriers. These 15 letter carriers delivered mail to Canton homes and businesses, making as many as 5 deliveries daily to downtown. The carriers would work out of a small post office that was located at the present site of the McKinley Grand Hotel. A few short years later, in 1894, President Grover Cleveland appointed Democrat John E. Monett, an attorney and politician from Louisville, as the postmaster of Canton. By 1896, the number of Canton employees would grow from 23 to 42, with 26 of those employees being city letter carriers. Monett would serve as the postmaster of Canton until 1898, when the new president and Canton's own William McKinley would replace him with a member of his Republican Party. The size and influence of Branch 238 continued to grow throughout the early 1900s, culminating in the branch hosting the NALC National Convention in 1907. In January of 1907, Branch 238 was 34 members strong, led by branch president Frank Dodd. One of the major concerns of letter carriers at the time were wages. In the early 1900s, letter carriers did not have collective bargaining and relied upon Congress to approve any pay raises. This was complicated by the fact that in 1902, President Theodore Roosevelt issued a gag order on postal employees. This executive order forbade all postal and federal employees from either directly or indirectly, individually, or through associations to solicit members of Congress for wage increases or to try to influence the passage of any other legislation, except through the heads of their department. This gag order deprived government workers of their constitutional right to petition the government. This executive order was followed by another executive order in 1906 by Roosevelt that forbid postal employees from discussing their working conditions with the public. The NALC addressed these gag orders in numerous ways, but possibly the most effective was the creation of the Ladies' Auxiliary. Ladies' auxiliaries were typically made of spouses of letter carriers. Not bound by gag orders, they would lobby Congress on behalf of their letter carrier spouses. The Ladies' Auxiliary of Branch 238 was founded on August 1, 1906. At the time of their founding, the auxiliary had 19 members but grew to 22 by March of 1907 and would hold their meetings at the Calvary Presbyterian Church at 1525 Shorb Avenue Northwest. The church was demolished in June of 2023. In the lead up to the 1907 convention, the members of Branch 238 were busy in organizing and preparing the event. There was help from the local community, though, with the Canton Trade Committee lending a significant hand in setting up and preparation. In a show of how important the convention was to the city of Canton, The postmaster at the time, George H. Clark, was appointed as the chair of the Trade Convention Committee. The trade organization was vital in helping Branch 238 in setting up the National Convention. Finally, after much preparation by the branch and the community, the National Convention was held in 1907 on September 2nd. The delegates were greeted by Branch President Darr and the St. Louis Letter Carriers Band. After a brief introduction, President Darr made his way for Canton Mayor A.R. Turnbull. Records indicate that there were 1,500 delegates and visitors to the convention, with all delegates making the walk to the McKinley Monument on September 2nd, 1907 for a group photo. It was the first organized march and the first official photograph of the monument, as it would not have made its public dedication until September 30th, 1907. At the convention, the delegates elected William E. Kelly as president of the NALC, replacing Jeremiah Holland after a 2-year term. Kelly would go on to serve the NALC as president for 7 years. By all accounts, the National Convention was a success, with E.J. Midday of Branch 238 calling it the most successful convention ever held in Canton, from both a financial and personal point of view. After the convention, Branch 238 continued to grow and change, much like the national NALC and the nation itself. Eventually, the gag order imposed by Teddy Roosevelt was lifted, but letter carriers still had to beg Congress for wage increases and other benefits. These struggles were further made more difficult by 2 world wars and a Great Depression. Prior to the Great Depression of the 1920s, letter carrier jobs were seen as less desirable, with low pay, long days, and physically demanding work. During the Great Depression, however, letter carriers' jobs were viewed as one of the few stable jobs in the economy, with pay on par with the private sector. Unfortunately, letter carriers were not exempt from the pain of the rest of the American worker during the Great Depression. Prior to the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1933, President Herbert Hoover attempted to balance the federal government's budget by requiring employees to take furloughs from work. Shortly after his election, however, FDR instituted a 15% pay cut across the board for government employees, including letter carriers. Hardest hit by the cuts were substitute letter carriers, who earned as little as 65 cents an hour prior to the 15% cuts by FDR. Letter carriers would not see a raise in their pay until 1941. In August of 1943, Branch 238 celebrated its 52nd anniversary. The members celebrated their 52nd anniversary at the Bus Drivers Hall on Tuesday, August 10, 1943. Based on reports at the time, the carriers planned to cut a birthday cake to celebrate the occasion. 52 years after its founding, Branch 238 had grown to 129 members, with 100 employed at the Canton Post Office, 14 retirees, and the rest making up associate members. Throughout the 1940s and 50s, the branch remained active on the national stage, attending conventions and growing in membership. Despite the increase in membership and clout, letter carriers across the country were still woefully underpaid. Letter carriers were still required to collectively beg Congress for raises. By 1960, many letter carriers were still required to work 2 jobs to make ends meet. The NALC on the national level was successful in lobbying Congress to pass a pay bill in June of 1960, only to have it vetoed by President Dwight Eisenhower. Due to successful lobbying by the NALC, Congress overrode the president's veto to give letter carriers a long overdue pay raise. In 1962, President Kennedy signed Executive Order 10988. This executive order granted federal employees the right to form, join, and assist labor organizations, and to engage in collective bargaining with their agencies for the first time. On September 3, 1962, the Post Office Department officially recognized the NALC as the exclusive bargaining representative for city letter carriers. Throughout the 1960s, letter carriers received what could be best described as modest pay raises until the Vietnam War. Despite these challenges for letter carriers, the members of Branch 238 were active in the community and giving back. In 1957, former Major League Baseball player Tim Trainer retired and opened Tim's Tavern in Canton. When Tim opened his tavern, letter carriers would support his business. This eventually led to a partnership with Branch 238 that led to the Tim Trainer Letter Carrier Scholarship Fund. Since 1967, the Tim Trainer Scholarship is awarded to a child, grandchild, great-grandchild, or legal ward of Branch 238 members. The The scholarship is funded with an annual fish fry held by branch in April or May each spring. So, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Robert E. Lee.
Hi, Robert.
From,
What do you do for the branch?
well, right now I'm the health benefit rep for Branch 238.
When did you start for the post office?
I started in 1969,
Okay.
November the 10th, and I thought the next day I'd have a holiday, but I had to work. That's another thing. That Tim Triner's scholarship probably got started before we merged, and that was from Bill McDonald knowing Tim Triner himself, and they set up the idea of a scholarship for the branch members, their children and their grandchildren to get scholarship. And we've had fish fries, and ever since I can remember when I merged with Canton, it's a great thing.
Who was Tim Triner?
Tim Triner owned a fish place, a restaurant over in Canton. He had the best fish around, and a lot of people liked it. And he was really good for helping us out on the fish fry. He donated the fish. He helped cook the fish and fry the fish, and he just was really a good thing in our fish fry. Helped a lot of our students.
I'm Gloria Miller. I am a former branch president of Branch 238 NALC. Tim Triner was a good friend of some of these retirees. He had a nice restaurant and he would donate all the fish, which is where the name of Tim Triner came from, because Tim Triner donated all the fish. And I mean, it was really the only way we could do this. And it just grew and grew, and not sometimes as much as we would like it, because it's hard for letter carriers to even get nowadays to get off work by 6 o'clock, let alone be at a fish fry to help before we open it. But we do, we still manage. We have a committee, volunteers, and it is nicely attended thing. It really is. It's not just the regular carriers. A lot of retirees come, and it's one of the projects where you can bring your family, which is kind of cool, because we have a lot of gatherings for the members, whether it's training or this or that. But this is one thing where you can literally bring your kids and the family hangs out with other families. You know what? The Tim Triner Scholarship was really something that was started way before me. Basically, what it was a couple older retirees that decided they wanted to do a scholarship. So what they would do is they thought a fish fry would be a neat idea. They wanted a fish fry, and they wanted something to do with the money once they did the fish fry. So, I mean, I don't know. I'd have to look, and you can check for sure the year. I mean, I think it went back to like 1960 something when it started, and they would fry up the fish and have this fish fry.
All right, my name is Scott Smith. I'm the president of Branch 238 here in Canton, Ohio. I took the position in January of 24. Fish fry was always a good time. It was different every year. I mean, I think I went. It was back when we were at the Legion. We were doing it there, but a lot of it was run by the same people until here. The past couple of years, same people ran it. The one year I'll never forget, I brought the whole family, and some of them were like in a drum class, and I'll never forget Mary Allen. She's retired now out of Massillon, and they had these little drums that were fit between your knees, and we're in the Legion, which was not much, didn't seem much bigger than the hall, and they're all pounding away on these drums. Next thing you know, my kids are over there pounding on the drums with all these people, and they thought it was the greatest thing in the world. But no, it was always a good thing. And it always was well attended by everyone, from all aspects. It's for a good cause, for our own people.
What is the cause for the fish fry?
The cause for fish fry is for the Tim Triner Scholarship, and that is based on Tim Triner, who owns Tim's Tavern, or did at the time. He was a very close person with Bill McDonald, and they decided they were going to do something back in the late 60s for the members of our branch, and help kids go and get an opportunity to help them a little bit, knowing that we're blue collar workers. We're not, we don't come from a bunch of money. We earn our money, to get bonuses at the post office. So this was one of those things where we take care of our own. And it was always, I think it's still the same price as we were paying back then. To this day, 30 years later, still paying the same amount of money for a great dinner. But our people have always stayed pretty true to that. And
throughout the 1960s, letter carriers across the country struggled with low pay and difficult working conditions. These difficulties came to a head in March of 1970 when members of the New York City Letter Carriers Branch 36 called for an illegal wildcat strike. While striking was done by a majority of letter carriers in big cities, letter carriers locally still benefited from the walkout.
Well, what I can remember in Massillon, Canton, I was a clerk at the time in Canton, Ohio. And I remember them talking how they was going to strike, and New York walked out. And so myself and a couple other gentlemen, we was, like I said, a clerk, and we was throwing magazines. And I said, you know what? If they're going to strike, we better walk. Well, yeah, they said, if you walk, we'll walk. I said, okay. So I started out and went out in the parking lot over in Canton on Cleveland Avenue. And I turned around and nobody was with me. I said, whoa, I better go back in because they can fire one guy easier than they can fire everybody. Well, what I found out is nobody in Canton or Akron or anybody struck around here in Ohio. It was mostly in New York, Schenectady, New York, where that's where Vince Sombrado was from. He was our national president, not at the time, but he was a letter carrier. And that's all I can remember about the strike. And then, of course, things was building up where the mail was piling up. So we finally got the strike settled.
By June 20th, 1970, Branch 238 had approximately 270 members within its ranks. Through the hard work and dedication of the branch and its officers, Branch 238 was finally able to secure its own building in 1978. The William O. McDonald Jr. Union Hall, named after President Emeritus William McDonald, is located at 1718 Navarre Road Southwest in Canton. The site of a former Gerber's grocery store, the branch still uses the hall to this day as a meeting location, offices, and apartment rentals. In 1980, Branch 238 merged with Massillon Branch 435.
I was thinking back in 1979, I said, there was only actually two of us running the show, and my vice president, Paul Westland, and myself. And of course, we had a great secretary, Ralph Fetzer, who was a great guy too, but it seemed like couldn't get any help, one of them things. And I brought up to the membership about merging with Branch 238. I had seen Branch 238 at a convention in 1978 in Chicago, where all the gentlemen that were at the convention for Branch 238, they had things really under control. And I said, boy, that's how I'd like to have it. And so I went back to my branch in 1979 and said, hey, how about merging with Branch 238? Of course, they'd have to agree with that. Branch 238 would. But of course, I had to get the membership on Branch 435 to okay it. And we had a vote on it, and I gave the cons and the pros and cons against it and for it, of course. And we passed to go ahead and merge. So I invited a couple of the gentlemen over from Branch 238, Nick Amatides, Bill McDonald, of course. He was the president at the time. Gary Cameron and Tats Nito, and I invited them to a dinner over in Massillon at Christmas time. And we talked a little bit. I let Branch 238 tell my members what the pros and cons were for merging. And so Canton, Branch 238 had to vote on that, and they voted to pass it. So we merged in March of 1980.
Even with hard-fought successes in Washington, Branch 238 still had to engage in informational picketing to bring awareness to issues that affected letter carriers. In the late 1970s, letter carriers in Canton and Massillon engaged in picketing to bring attention to the post office's refusal to negotiate a fair contract with letter carriers. While Branch 238 members have never been shy about fighting for a fair contract, they are also involved heavily within the Canton community. And one of the biggest parts of the Canton community is the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Opened in Canton in 1963, the Professional Football Hall of Fame was founded as a way to honor exceptional figures in football. On August 2, 1986, National President Vince Zambrano attended the football enshrinement ceremony with members of the NFL and Branch 238. Legends of the game such as Frank Tarkenton, Ken Houston, and Dak Walker were enshrined this year. A signed football was presented to Vince, which is in Branch 238's case to this day. In addition to participating in the enshrinement ceremony, Branch 238 has participated in the enshrinement parade for many years. There are many photos of colorful floats built by Branch 238 members around the hall that have been in the parade throughout the years. Through the 90s and 2000s, Branch 238 continued to be active in the community and picketing for the rights of letter carriers in Canton and abroad. Several rallies to bring public awareness to proposals brought on by the Postal Service were held. As the post office attempted to modernize, Branch 238 ensured that the public was aware of the Postal Service's attempts to downgrade service.
I think the union had a very strong hold on what was going on at that time. And they were very involved. And, management, which we would say this now, a lot of management is just in the job and they're just in the job to do the job and they really don't know anything about carrying mail. It was somewhat like that. I mean, the carriers knew way much more than the management people. And the carriers were very controlling of what went on the workroom floor. They were heard and they were listened to. Yeah, like I said, when I first started, they tried to intimidate you to do whatever you needed to and whatever. But you had the guys that looked out after you and made sure that you understood, probably because they didn't want you to kill their routes and probably because, they wanted to make sure that the routes in general were protected. So the image of the union physically was really good. I mean, these guys would wear the ties and they looked really sharp going out there. And I don't know, maybe to some degree they intimidated management because they were sharp and spot on. So, I was nervous because of being new to the job, but I don't think they let too many people take advantage of the new carriers, the union.
Well, in the early part of 2000, it was extremely heavy still. Letter mail, flat mail. We started getting automation in the late 90s. But the volume of mail was wild. We didn't have very much light days at all. Every day was, we were always stacked with mail. I think it was in 2007 when housing decided to take a big hit, that market and everything dropped. Like that next year or two, I was even working for the NALC, or working for the branch. And we seen just the bottom drop out of everything.
While Branch 238 continued to represent its members through the 90s and 2000s, it faced one of its greatest tragedies on October 19, 2006, when PTF Jennifer Milburn was shot and killed while delivering mail.
Jennifer Milburn was probably the hardest time in my career. I was new. Well, 2006, I believe, was the year. And she was new. And I always tried to go to offices when there were new people, and especially if a new person was having issues, which Jennifer Milburn had only been on the job a few weeks. The day before Jennifer Milburn was killed in the line of duty, and that's, I want to describe it that way, I had heard that there were gunshots out on this route, and So I showed up the next morning. She was on the route. We talked. I let her know that being new, if she didn't feel comfortable, she wouldn't have to go out on that route, that we would make sure that maybe a more seasoned person went, or that maybe somebody would go out with her. Because basically, it was just her gunshots she heard, which unfortunately nowadays it is common in some neighborhoods. But at that time, it seemed like we hadn't had that type of violence in Canton. And so, no, she told me, no, I'll be fine. She was a college graduate. Her uh, uncle was a carrier in Canton. Her aunt was a postmaster. There was connections to the postal service through her family, and she still seemed positive. No, I can do this. So she went out, and probably about another, I'd say about an hour and a half, she had been shot and killed. So, um, it was a hard time. It wasn't like the violence was targeting her, but what it kind of brought to light that just by doing your job, something like this could happen. She was on a porch putting mail in the mailbox, and a car drove by, and there was another gentleman in the alley, and I'm not going to call him a gentleman. There was a person in the alley that wanted to shoot at him as he was driving by, and he was probably more than one gunshot that he shot to try to just hit this guy driving by, and it hit her on the porch. It was, I don't want to call it a freak accident. It was just, she just happened to be on that porch when they were doing the shooting. So basically, we got the call that it happened. And that's one interesting thing about mailmen and customers, they're everywhere. So we actually, my secretary, Gary Kammer, longtime secretary, actually got to the accident or the scene before even the postal service got there. Surprise. But I went straight to the hospital, and at that time her family hadn't really arrived, and the postmaster was there, and we got to go up into the room to wait for the family to arrive. And then her mom went directly up to the hospital room, and we just kind of felt that maybe she had passed, because nobody was really saying she's in surgery or anything like that, and they were actually just waiting for the rest of the family to get there, and then they notified us that she had passed.
Well, I was on my way in. I had a couple hours. I don't know if I was at Duber Station, and I did a couple hours there in the morning, and I was on my way walking in the door. And Gloria, Gary, Kammer, I'm trying to remember who else. I don't know if Karen was doing it too. Karen was on her way to the scene. And on that day, she was just a young girl delivering mail, and there was some shots rang out at New Market the day before. They got them off the streets. There was some more shots that day, so she called in. They told her to continue to deliver mail, and ended up being two cars chasing each other, shooting, and she caught a stray bullet from that situation. But Gloria and them went to the scene to make sure everything was what we could do.
Tragedy. The other thing, we did a march for the Jennifer Milburn cause. I mean, it was really interesting how much the community embraced us, and that was really a good thing. We had a flower shop that donated roses, and we did like a half a mile walk down the street where she was killed, and we all were able to lay flowers at the residence of where she was killed. It was an older man that lived there, and he was the one who came out and held her while all of this was going on when she got shot, and he welcomed all of us being there. um, it was, it made the news, obviously, not just the tragic death, but what the community did by getting together. And that was the good part of the story. Yeah, there was a trial, there was all of this that happens when somebody gets killed, but I tried to focus on the positive of what we did to bring awareness to how easy it could happen to anybody, to bring, you know, um, the positive of the community looking out after us, and you know, even the Postal Service, for the most part, was very engaged into what we needed to do for safety.
Through this tragedy came the Jennifer Milburn Memorial Scholarship. Ran by Jennifer's family, the scholarship is awarded to a child, grandchild, great grandchild, or legal ward of a member of Branch 238 each year in memory of Jennifer. The scholarship is funded by proceeds from the Jennifer Milburn Golf Outing, held each June.
We started getting donations, and the family at the time was so heartbroken. She was the only child of Dan and Barb Milburn. So when we got all these donations, at the time they were going through their grief, they really didn't want to do anything with the money. So I just took the money and we put it in a bank account, and we just left it there. And after a few years, we went to them again and said, this is the money was donated to you. It's in a bank account under Jennifer Milburn. And they decided they would start up scholarships because they wanted her daughter to be remembered in a good way. So that's where the Jennifer Milburn Scholarship thing came. We had a retiree that got involved. Mike Hogan was very involved in helping organize a golf outing. And, it was run by letter carriers. We did everything that it took to do that. And at some point, when this golf outing and everything became more than what we as carriers could handle, the family took it over. And since then, they've done the scholarships. But it went from them donating one scholarship to donating 2 scholarships to now, they will donate like $1,500 to 5 of the kids. So, that is a really an awesome thing that enhances our own Tim Tyner scholarship. So, they've done something good, and they do it solely for the children of the members of the branch.
Milburn family was based on a young lady who, when I was vice president, unfortunately, she was killed on the job. And as the branch did at that time, as what people at the union do is we help each other. In that manner, there was a lot of hoops that had to be jumped through, and a lot of different things to take care of the Milburn, the young lady, and we stepped up as like we always do, and made sure her family was taken care of, and she was. A lot of it was spearheaded by Gloria, and she did a great job. I'll never forget the day, that unfortunate situation. But the family, they've always kicked back to this branch to help us, And I mean, every year that I can, I'm always there. If I don't golf, I'll make sure I'm there having a beer and some food. So, but it's always, donating, items to, throwing money in, to tickets to, help our own.
Throughout the 2000 and 2010s, Branch 238 has put a greater emphasis on community involvement and honoring its members. Each year, the branch hosts a retirement dinner in September for all members and retirees free of charge. This is an opportunity for members and retirees to congregate together in union. In addition, the branch is an active participant in the Stamp Out Hunger Food Drive. Each year, letter carriers will collect food donations from their routes and bring them back to the post office. Those donations are kept locally and distributed to various charities in Stark County.
You know what? We became involved when, obviously, the food drive. It's awesome. We all branches that participate in the food drive, that it's an amazing thing because all you do is pick up food and it gets donated. There's a lot of work that comes when I say you just pick up food because you got carriers that pick up a lot of food, and sometimes their bag is full, and sometimes they're trying to, justify the time used and things like that. But you know what? A lot of the community appreciates that. So that to me was a wonderful thing. And it also, throughout the years, you had to find different ways to keep that community engaged. So, we tried to do different things. We tried to do challenges, like the one time, with the help of the mayor of Canton, Janet Creighton, she did one of those challenges with us. As the mayor, she challenged her city departments. See how much food you guys can do. And we had this like ceremony, and it was really great to see, the water department show up with a truck full of food, and then here comes this department with a truckload of food, but all the council brought food. So it was an awesome challenge to get the competition, but it worked, and we did that. We tried to do things where we engaged with the schools, to where the schools, we got some flyers printed. They could be passed out at schools. The kids could paint. It was this flyer picture that the kids could color and take home and put on their refrigerator. It was kind of a way to remind them that on this day we're going to do food. So we engaged with that. We also engaged with kind of challenging the other unions.
The history of Branch 238 is long and storied. From its humble beginnings in 1891 to where it stands today as a pillar of the local community. 134 years after 15 letter carriers organized for better working conditions and pay, we still have the same fights to this day. It is the dedication of its members that will ensure that battle will be successfully fought for the next 134 years.